So the Big Ten and SEC want to fundamentally change the way that the college football playoff is put together on a couple of different fronts. Now, one of them I disagree with, and we might get into that later in the episode. But on one aspect, I think that they are right. I think that the Big Ten and SEC have it correct in how the college football playoff should be structured, especially in 2025, before we get probably drastic changes in 2026. And that is that the Big Ten and SEC would like to go to straight seeding. No more conference champions get the bye. No more 4 teams get the bye. No more situations where number 1 Oregon going into the college football playoff last year, their reward for being the only undefeated team, the only conference champion, the number 1 seed, the only conference champion that's undefeated, the number 1 overall seed, their reward for doing all of that was not getting to play the worst seed remaining. Which is, in retrospect, kind of a crappy system, right? Because that should be like the top-ranked team should, in theory, have the easiest path to the college football playoff national championship game. That's the benefit of being number 1. And they didn't really get that. Does that stink? Yeah. But would they likely have had to have played Ohio State at some point? Yeah. Now, if it goes as poorly as it did in the first half of the Rose Bowl is a different discussion for a different day. But getting one trial crack at it, you get to kind of see the cracks at it going, okay, this stinks, this is awesome. Because when you get into a position where, for instance, Arizona State is ranked as the 12th best team on the committee's list of teams in the playoff, but they get a first-round bye because they won the Big 12, yes, there is a bit of a like, this isn't great. So the Big Ten and SEC are advocating for straight seeding, 1 through 12, and it's basically like the top 12 teams. And like, you're used to looking at an NCAA tournament bracket, right? You know that a 1 plays a 16, etc. 6 plays 11, 7 plays 10, etc. They are advocating for straight seeding. But I don't know that they're going to get their way, but this is what, for instance, last year straight seeding would have looked like in the college football playoff if they still did buys. Now, it doesn't seem as if everybody's on board with doing away with buys, and it doesn't seem like everybody is on board with keeping buys. So that will be an interesting discussion, but this is what it would have looked like with buys. And I don't know that it would have looked exactly like this because they would have done some things to avoid this, right? Like Indiana, number 8 Indiana at number 9, or I guess I have that backwards. Number 9 Indiana at number 8 Penn State. They wouldn't have had that first-round matchup because they're in the same conference. And then the winners of that game would move on to play number 1 Oregon at the Rose Bowl. That seems much better in my eyes than what you got, which was Oregon, the number 1 team, getting to play Ohio State, Tennessee. So this is kind of the juxtaposition of what it looked like or would look like if we went straight seeding and the top 4 teams aren't automatically conference champions. So you get different matchups rather than what we got. But I think this is a good way to look at and highlight kind of the best of both worlds. Because I think the main knock against the college football playoff being expanded to 12 teams, and I don't think this is going to get any better when it goes to 14 or 16 teams, is that it makes the regular season less important. I disagree with that. I believe that it makes more games more important, and that's a good spot to be in my stance. Having more games rather than if you lose your first 2 games of the season and then you go on a 10-game winning streak and you beat all of your opponents by 40 points in a 4-team college football playoff, you're probably not getting in. And I think that sucks. I think the idea that you have to be perfect throughout the entire duration of the season. There are some people who believe that that is a feature, not a bug. I disagree with that. But I think if you do away with the conference champions, the 4 highest seeded conference champions get the bye, I think that also reinvigorates the regular season. It still makes the regular season really important, which is, I think, a fair aspect for people to want and expect of the college football playoff. They want the college football season, all 14 weeks of it, to be really important. And I can get on board with that. But then this system also still incentivizes winning a conference championship, and that is, I think, a really big aspect that people don't want to hear about, but the power brokers of college football want the conference championship games to matter. In fact, I would say they would argue they need the conference championship games to matter because they get extra TV money, they get extra sponsorship money, they get the ability to put all of their sponsors in one city and wine and dine them, sell tickets, sell extra sponsorships, make extra TV money. Those conferences want the conference championship games to matter. If they are just a de facto exhibition, that's a bad thing for them. So they have to find a way to make them still matter. But I think that the way the conference championship games still matter is the same way that conference championship games in literally every other sport matter, in that it gets you into the NCAA tournament. Now, that's not what the college football playoff is called, but that's what college basketball tournaments are. That's what college baseball tournaments are, college hockey, softball, volleyball. They all do the tournament, and the winner gets guaranteed bid to the thing everybody wants to go to. So that's still incentive enough in my eyes, because if you look at the way that the ACC championship game shook out last year, for instance, Clemson beat SMU. And SMU still got into the college football playoff instead of Alabama. And I told you leading up to that, they're not going to penalize somebody for making the conference championship. No matter what, SMU was in. People thought I was stupid. I was ultimately correct. They're just never going to penalize somebody for playing an extra game, for being successful, while Alabama sat at home and did nothing. So I don't see how you can do that. But anywho, Clemson won their way into the college football playoff, which is what Arizona State did, which is what Oregon did, which is what Boise State did. Georgia, they won their way into the tournament. Having a guaranteed slot is still a really nice consolation prize compared to getting the guaranteed first round bye, because you can argue with the results, and I don't know that it's great to do it after 1 year, but all of those teams that got first-round byes lost. You can look at that multiple ways. The flip side of that is in the 11-game college football playoff, favorites went 10-1. So it appears as if things went somewhat according to plan, other than Ohio State putting a whooping on Oregon. That was the one. That was the only one. Everything else, at least according to Vegas, went to plan. And so when your bracket looks the way it does, when the team that is the number 2 ranked team in the country is not the favorite in a virtual backyard game against Notre Dame, I think it's fair to then look at and make changes. I don't think that's an outrageous thing. I don't think that's something that you should overlook and say, that's just an anomaly. Now, if after 11 games, favorites go 10-1, that's a pretty impressive look at the college football playoff, and it wasn't all that crazy that those were the games, that the one game that we thought, oh, hell, that's not the result I expected. That team went on to win the national championship. So there are definitely improvements to be made, and I think that the Big Ten and SEC are right in the idea of straight seeding. But it is interesting to see who's not on board with giving first-round buys and who is on board with giving first-round buys, because I think I would rather just see 1 through 12. I think I would rather see, in this scenario, in this case, number 1 Oregon playing host to number 12 Clemson, rather than 5 versus 12. 12 moves on to play 4. 8 versus 9. Winner moves on to play 1. No. We'll just set it up 1 through 12, baby. And you start putting teams together, and everything adds up to 13. And that is how you seed the thing, and then you get going. I don't know if you then go about re-racking it and doing all of those things. I don't know that I feel super strongly with the idea that, hey, we're going to make sure that the number 1 team goes against the lowest seeded team throughout the duration. I don't know that I feel great about that being such a gigantic advantage, but I would rather see the bracket just split down, all right, 1 through 12, and let's do this thing, rather than first-round buys and things like that. I understand that there are a lot of hurdles to jump and a lot of different things that you have to go about doing to get that done, because that's essentially adding a whole another round to the college football playoff within the first weekend, where you're already struggling to find TV windows to make it all work and all of those things. So I understand that's a somewhat gigantic hurdle to get over. But is that what's best for the sport? Probably. And I think that's the way that a lot of people should think about it and should operate going forward, is not what's best for the Big Ten, not what's best for the SEC, not what's best for the ACC, the Mountain West, etc. What is best for college football? And nobody does that, because everybody has competing interests, and we can talk about this another day, that there should be a commissioner of college football that gets everybody on board and pulling in the same direction, because the constant infighting and everybody looking out for each other, or looking out for themselves rather than looking out for each other, is a gigantic problem at the end of the day. And I mentioned at the start of the show that there is a portion of the Big Ten and the SEC that say, this is what we agree on of how the college football playoff should operate. We're going to go to 16 teams, and the top 4 teams in the SEC and the top 4 teams in the Big Ten get automatic berths. I think that sucks. I think that's terrible. I think it's a horrible way to operate, because just the idea that it's a damn guarantee that the 4th best team in the Big Ten is better than the 3rd best team in the ACC or Big 12 is a stupid way to operate. I don't want to see teams get automatic berths just because they are in a conference. I want to see the 12 or 14 or 16 best teams in the country, conferences be damned. I'm probably in the minority in that, but that's just like the idea that this is going to be based on who you know rather than merit, I think sucks. But in one instance, where it's just straight seeding, baby, if you didn't earn the number 4 seed, but you get it because you won the conference championship, I think that kind of stinks. So we're not going to do that. And I think the Big Ten and SEC are right in their thought process, at least in this instance, in that half. And the other half of, well, wouldn't it be great if we expanded to 16 teams and 8 of those slots are guaranteed to us? No, that's not great. Don't love that. But straight seeding, yeah, it's probably the way to go, and it probably should have been the way to go from the get-go. I want to know your thoughts. What do you want to see the college football playoff look like? Do you want to see the highest-rated conference champions get a bye, or do you want to see 1 versus 12, and who gives a damn about who won their conference? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you get all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.